how can people as individuals be more creative within a team?
Do you ever wish life had an undo button? Walking the balance between business and the creative life can be hard. But Matt and Shelby are here to attempt to answer the tough questions, so you don't need an undo. Presented by Made by Things. This is the CMD-Z Show.
All right. So, my name is Matt, and I'm here with Shelby.
Hey.
Hi, Shelby. And today we have a very, very important guest. I know I say this about everybody, but especially, a lot of the guests that we are having kind of in this second season are people that are generally people that I've been close with over the last few years, and people that I've gotten creative inspiration from. And they're sort of like the team I've put around myself to help me answer questions that I have, or just people to learn from, right? And everybody kind of has a different specialty, and that's why I love getting this group of people together and letting everyone hear the things that I steal from them on a daily basis, right? So today's guest is Jons McNeal. Hey, John.
Hello. How are you guys?
Good.
So glad to be here. You said important guest. That I want to lower everybody's expectations. Let me lower the bar.
No way.
But man, I appreciate being here, and I feel the same about conversations. I think and reference you a lot in my conversations, probably more than you realize. So it's great to be here.
Yeah. So before we jump into the question, John, you want to do like a little intro to yourself? Nothing too crazy, but let's get a brief overview of who you are.
Yeah. So I own a animation studio called To Reveal. Started it in 2002, and I think that's how Matt, you and I originally got connected. And I also am a executive coach and a peer advisory group chair. So those are kind of the things that I'm juggling right now. I work a lot with CEOs and form peer groups to help them figure out and solve their complex challenges in business.
Yeah. All right. So if anyone hears any knocking throughout this conversation, it's my children just trying to make things difficult during their summer vacation. But
and it totally could be mine. I'm fully expecting my 6-year-old to come bursting through that door and be like, "Daddy, can I have some candy?"
It's like, wait 1 minute. No, I need candy now.
He's like, "Candy
None
now."
of that stuff can wait.
So, yeah.
All right. So the question that I have here, it kind of relates to this sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a transition that you've sort of made over the last few years, but it's definitely something that I've always found really interesting, is that you have found yourself, I don't know, I guess you talked about a little bit ago. It's sort of this creative coaching kind of thing that you're sort of doing. How do you describe it? Do you say that, creative coaching?
Yeah, let's go with it. I said executive coach just because
Executive coach. That's good too.
Yeah, I like creative coach. I like better.
And so over this journey of, having a skill set that you've kind of created over a long period of time, and then kind of shifting a little bit or just adding on that skill set of being able to be some sort of creative coach, I think it makes you, I don't know, especially able to answer this question. Are you ready?
Hit me with it.
All right.
Hit me with your best shot. Sorry.
So the question is, how can people as individuals be more creative within a team? Now, I know that that's a pretty simple question to say it, but I realize that is a very big thing. Being able to be creative as an individual, I think is one thing, is one challenge in itself. But then being creative as a team, I think, is a whole other challenge entirely, where it takes a lot more I don't know if you want to call it push and shove, but I'm curious, where do you go from there? Go ahead. Try to answer the question.
Yeah. The answer is yes. Next question.
What's your favorite color?
So, yeah. I think first what you said, starting off with creativity as an individual, I think it has to start there. Honestly, one of the things as I talk to, CEOs and business owners just about creativity, I do speaking on creativity. One of the things I talk to them about is, I share this thing of there's a CEO several years ago who hired a group of psychologists, and this was a CEO of a publishing house, a publishing studio, and they said, hey, there's people who he identified as being highly creative or performing at a quote-unquote highly creative capacity, and then there's a bunch of people who weren't. And he hired these psychologists and said, I want to figure out like what's going on here. Why are these people performing so well and why are these people not? And they took a year of study and research to try to figure out like, okay, what's going on here? And at the end of the year, these psychologists came back and said, we figured it out. We know why this group of people, they're performing in a, again, quote unquote, highly creative capacity as described by the CEO, and why this other group is not. And I ask people, I say, well, what do you think is the answer? Like, what do you feel like was the difference? What's the difference between why this group is and why this group isn't? And I hear all sorts of answers, right? It's a lot of it has to do with the manager or who they're working under, and these are all things that can influence your creativity, right? Deadlines or lack of deadlines, whether there's people around them who are uplifting them, and all these different things, right? And the only answer that they gave was the people who were performing in a highly creative capacity believed that they were creative. And the people who were not believed that they were not. And I use this as an intro to start talking about creativity, to say creativity has to start with you. And it has to start with you as an individual. Even as one step before that, I asked people, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how creative are you? And I said, I'll say numbers. You raise your hand when you get to your number. I'll go 1, 2, 3. Most people like 7 or 8. And then then I tell that story and I ask them, well, what do you think is the answer? And they all have answers. And then when I say the creative people believe they're creative, and it all comes back to like your mindset. And so I think, and I think about that in terms of like your team and the people you work with. How many other people on your team are you working with that just don't believe that they're creative? Now, if you gather a bunch of people who think I'm not creative, and then you put them together and say, hey, let's come up with some creative ideas. Well, people are like, oh, I'm really not good at art. I don't know how to paint, or I'm not like. I hear so many different things, so it has to start with each person individually, and I think we have to like have that conversation, because if we're going to be a high functioning team, or if you're going to work on a high functioning team, it really starts with each person saying, I have creative ideas. I have a lot that I bring to the table, and it's different than this person. It's different than this person. And that doesn't mean that my creativity is any less than theirs. It just may look different. So that's my first thought. And then when it comes to like working together in a team, once you and the thing that I suggest for people, by the way, if they're saying like, how do I grow in my own creativity? I struggle with this in my own area. I really recommend journaling. I say like, and do like what I call creative affirmations, like speak about yourself, specifically speak about your creativity. And affirm yourself even in the first, second, and third person. Like, John, you are creative. I, John, am creative. John, you are creative. And just keep doing that day after day after day. Because in doing that, you're going to hear yourself saying the things that you wish other people had said about you, right? All of the compliments in your entire life have gotten you to the place where you are now. And I said, hey, if you gave yourself a 7, all of the compliments that you've had your entire life got you to a 7, right? You have to keep saying it to yourself and keep repeating it. And then just as you have any type of I don't know, anything that comes up that says like, no, you're going to hear a voice in your head that says, no, you're not. You're like, you're creative, right, and you just write those things off to the side, and then you just kind of work your way through like, okay, well, in what ways is that really untrue? Well, I work with this client and they said they didn't think I had creative ideas. And I'd say, well, maybe that person doesn't know me. Maybe we haven't known them that long. They've never seen my body of work. They've never, just come up with your own reasons why that assumption is wrong. So that's a side note to step into how do you then start working as a team, right? And let me say, well, your question again, is it specifically how do we work together creatively as a team? I want to make sure I'm addressing that.
Right. So how do you, I guess it's sort of like, how do you use the creativity that you have and incorporate that with others and to be able to make something that doesn't just end up being just this Frankenstein of weird ideas, basically.
Right. So most recently when I think about creativity, I've thought a lot about the rules of improvisation and how if you've ever watched, like a comedy troupe, and they do like improv together, and there are certain rules that they follow, right? Hopefully you've heard of the yes and rule. You just kind of say yes to whatever somebody says. Somebody's like, oh wow, look over there, there's this, giant hot air balloon that just landed in your lawn. They're not going to go, no, it didn't. You say, yeah, and you say yes, and then you continue adding on to the story, right? So there's that aspect of it, right? Because I think that the way that they work together, it is really creative, and they're constantly playing off of each other. And I think that's kind of when I think about the model of how we work together creatively, and how a team works together, it has to be that you're playing off of each other, that you're not shooting each other's ideas down, that as somebody says something, you're saying like, hey, maybe that's a possibility. What else is there? And you just keep having these conversations about like, yeah, we're going to keep throwing ideas out there. Some of them may be completely absurd, and some of them may be like, okay, that's like really practical, but let's keep those ideas going, because it's all about like saying yes and then saying yes and the and part is you're taking somebody's idea and you're adding something onto it, saying yes, that's really interesting, and if they like there's a hot air balloon just landing in our yard, it's like, yeah, this is so crazy because we were just inside this anthill, just gathering up these apple pieces. All of a sudden you're like, so then you start thinking, okay, well maybe we're ants instead of people, okay, and then somebody else goes, yeah, and they add something else onto that story. So for me, the collaboration part of it is really big. I think we underestimate the power of our collective ideas and like working together. And that said too, there's also a component where each person has a set of, depending on your group, and I think you have to like think about your group dynamics too. Each person has, there's usually somebody who like can maybe dominate the conversation, right? And then there's a person who will sit back in the back and just like, I'll speak if I'm called on. So you also have to make sure that we give everybody a chance to speak up and to have their say. And so for me, that sometimes looks like everybody work together independently. So I'm going to give you all an index card. I want you to all write your ideas down first so that nobody dominates the conversation. And then we're going to go around and just read what you wrote. And that's our starting point. Let's share there. But it really has to do with like the improvisation part of it for me has been something that is rising. I don't know. It's becoming a little bit more in my view as I think about how teams work together, and they use it not to come up with some sort of like Frankenstein creative idea, but like how do we take ideas and then form something that's greater than each of our individual parts, right?
Right. I think that, I guess in my experience, there's a couple projects that I actually remember just early on in my career, I guess, where I'm like, I thought I had really great ideas for it, and the strategy for the upper management in these cases was, you know what, let's just let everyone come up with whatever ideas and we'll just do it all, basically. And I was like, well, now I feel like I guess it did a couple things. One, it made me quiet, because I was like, oh, well, there's 9 people sitting at this table and they're all contributing ideas to this project, and no one person seemed like they were sort of moderating or choosing anything. It seemed like they were just kind of leaving it up for grabs. So it did that, one. And then if you can hear that truck beeping, it's
Hey,
it's just how things are today, apparently.
Yes, and right.
And it went away.
Yes,
it was quiet.
I hear your beep, and I raise you. A child screaming in the background.
Right. So I guess one thing is it left me quiet, because I was like, well, I don't want to be that person that's being the loudest in the room. I never want to be that person, but at the same time, now, like, I feel like I'll jump in. If I feel like things are getting off the tracks, I'll jump in and be like, no, we're going too far. We did too many yes ands.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but that's just kind of my technique. Anyway, so it did that, and then it led to a not great project.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we did all the ideas, and it just didn't have any singular vision at all. It was just a combination of weird ideas, and it could have been.
And you're saying you're saying everybody's idea, and it was like, okay, so everybody needs to have a say in this. So we're gonna take, it's gonna be 1/9 of your idea, and 1/9 of it's gonna be your idea. Is that what you're saying? That they all contributed to?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't know. It wasn't based on an actual fractional portion, but
Sure.
It was like something similar to that, where it was like any ideas that were kind of shouted out, we just sort of did that thing. I wish I could remember all the details of this project, but basically it was like Quincy Jones' birthday, and this company was doing a video for him. I don't know.
No way.
It was this long thing. And, like, we had all these good ideas that had, like, real concept to them. But then there's people that, like, what if we did, like, little cards that, like, spun around and did this thing? And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. But it's like, I guess I thought in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe it just doesn't make sense to me because nobody's saying anything. So, like, I didn't feel like I could, I didn't want to, not necessarily shooting people's ideas down, but at the same time, like, I didn't feel like at that point that I could say, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So if there's probably another step before all of this too, is the level of trust that the team has with each other, right? If you don't have a relationship with people that you can openly and honestly share feedback, and that everybody just feels like, oh, okay, I don't want to hurt your feelings, so let's just go with it. That project's doomed for,
Right.
for failure. So there has to be this level of trust underneath it all. When I gather CEOs and in this like peer advisory group, right? And the first thing that we talk about in the group is, one, the group is highly confidential. Nobody's gonna. You're not allowed. It's kind of the Las Vegas rule, right? We're not going to share anything. Mm-hmm. That's actually grounds for dismissal from the group. If you share somebody else's thing, you can't be in this group anymore. But the other part of it is, we have to know each other well enough and to trust each other. And so there's this rule that says silence equals 100% agreement. If you say something and I agree 100% with what you said, I don't need to say anything. But if there's even a slight bit that I disagree with, I should speak up. Doesn't mean something's going to change. It doesn't mean whatever else, but at least I should say something, right? Because without that foundation of trust, without that foundation of transparency, and I think that's what happens. Like, a lot of times people come to the table and it's like you have this creative idea and it's almost like this is like your creative baby, and you're just like you want to protect it, and you're just,
right.
If you've ever had a project where you've done something even in school and somebody critiqued it and you're like, you're fighting back the tears. Like I poured my life into this thing, right? But we have to be able to, we have to trust. You know what I mean? It's like we have to trust. Yeah, I think trust is that foundational level, right? And it seems like to me, I'm not sure that trust is the right word. It feels like, I would say vulnerable is probably the better word, right? To be willing to be vulnerable with each other. I like the idea of like collecting ideas and people sharing ideas at one point, but at some point decisions have to be made. And you're going to have to say, okay, well, I'm not really crazy about that, or I'm not crazy about this. Ultimately, what I think has to happen is you have to look at your idea and say like, what here has like what is the biggest idea? What has the most potential to like really make an impact here? Because if you start with a really big idea, you can end with something that's like really like groundbreaking. If you start with a mediocre idea, by the time everybody chips in and whittles away, and even if you're in an organization where you got to send it up the chain to like, it's got to go up to their managers, and and they chip away at, next thing you know, you're doing something that you did in 1994, and you're like, we did this a long time ago. So it's got to start off with like, it's got to be like a really, really big idea. But it has to, and as you were saying that too, I think about like the whole like design by committee, right? How do you, my best thing, my example of like when I think about design by committee is like when you have this really corporate office building, and there's usually like there's like a sculpture out front. And I remember sometimes hearing that like those sculptures are like designed by committee. That like it's a group of people who kind of came up with an idea, or they whatever else. And so I don't know how much is it that you need one creative person really driving the direction, and they have input from others, or is it a compilation of a group of people who work well together? I've seen it work well in both instances, but there's something else at play that made them successful. You know what I mean?
Right. I love that you're bringing this up, this design by committee thing. So obviously it's a big problem that people always have with clients, is that I guess there's a few layers of just stuff there. One is that if you're working with a client that's not experienced in critiquing work, it can go badly. It can go very badly. Yeah. A lot of them kind of defer to, okay, well, let's have 8 people making decisions on this. So like for us, one of the first things we do is like, okay, no. All things need to filter through one trusted person. We don't want to talk to 8 people. We want to talk to one person. Mm-hmm. But honestly, even in those scenarios, sometimes people are like, okay, so Kevin said this, Becky said that, and it's like, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Like, you have to make a decision. Like, you can't do that. Like, I can...
Yeah, like that person was like, your job's not to be the reporter.
Right. So that's where it's like, it can be really tough for people to kind of go through this project, or through a project, and because they're not certain of themselves. They're like, well, I have opinions, but I don't know if it's right or wrong. That's probably the thing that we see most often. I mean, we're dealing with people on 5-6 figure projects sometimes, and the person that's in control of approving things, they're not very confident in what's right or wrong. And it can definitely be scary. But I think it's similar to, what we're talking about. Like, I guess in your case and in the one that I was talking about, we're often talking about internal teams. We're not necessarily talking about like cross collaboration from like different teams or partners and stuff like that. But I think it's that same concept where there needs to be a great level of trust if something is going to work out really well. And it's for both sides. Like sometimes, again, those notes from a client might get like, oh, geez, I really don't want to do that. But it's like, well, think about it. Like, is it going to make the project better? Can it? Like, sometimes we don't know, but sometimes it's just like, well, let's try it. But it's also not being afraid to say, that's not going to make this better. But I understand the issue that you have with it, and I want to think about that a little bit more and see how we might be able to solve that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, good.
Yeah. No. I think. So for me, the question I guess I would ask you, like, when you have these conversations with a client, how do you set up the trust, the vulnerability, or like the transparency, right? How does that happen, so that the client comes to you and says, yeah, we workshop that and we think you should do this instead, or we have these other ideas, or they just come back with, like you said, Steve said this, Debbie said this, whatever else.
Right.
How do you personally
Yeah.
get to the place in the relationship where you say, you hired us? Like, is it you hired us, let us do our job?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it you hired us, but you're an expert in you know your field. We
Right.
work together. And then there's other companies who just are like, I think maybe it's people who are a little less secure in their skills or their abilities. I would say it happens a lot of times with companies that are just starting off. They're just like, I'm just so happy to be making money, and so I'm gonna do whatever you want me to do. And then the client they do whatever the client wants them to do, and then they realize that they're not happy with it, and the client's not happy with it either, right? So how do you go about
Yeah.
developing that level of trust, right?
I think it starts a long time ago, right? Like, it starts well before a project starts with somebody. So anybody that knows anything about me knows that I generally post to LinkedIn at least once a day. Some days I don't, but whatever. And for me, I focus on LinkedIn being my sort of trust building a part of the funnel, right? If we look at it as a funnel, I'm just not trying to be schemy about it, but I'm just trying to be myself. Like, I think about, like, what are the things that actually build trust? And it's understanding who people are personally a little bit more. Like, if I was just to go on there and just talk about, like, companies need more videos, it's not going to do anything. That's not going to build trust. So for me, it starts there, about talking about real things and real thoughts and just ideas that I have, and just being really open with my life professionally and personally, honestly. And I have 100% noticed a difference. Like, after kind of doing that for a long period of time, whenever people reach out and they want to work together, they feel like they already know me. Like, I might not know them at all, but they're like, hey, I've been following your posts for a long time now. I get people all the time telling me, like, I feel like a stalker, like, knowing, like, all the stuff about you. I'm like, perfect. Like, that's how I want this to work. Like, I want you to know who I am. Now I don't have to sit here and, like, go on a bunch of dates, basically.
Explain who you are and what
Right.
Explain your values.
Right. Exactly. It's like, you already know. So now it's just my turn to learn about you. Yeah. So I get to have that chance with people very early on of, like, all right, like, what are you going through? What are you doing here? And it's just being completely honest with, like, oh, I can't help you with that. Or, like, yeah, I can do this. And I know that because we've done it before, something like this. Yeah. So, like, when you have proof like that, it always helps, right? So I just so much of my attention when it comes to creating content revolves around not skipping or not taking a shortcut in the relationship, but in a way it's sort of like making the relationship a little bit faster, like in those first early stages. And it helps with those things. Like, people used to reach out and they'll say, like, hey, I want something like this. And they'd show us work from, one of the many great studios in our country, right? And it's like, well, that's great. They have a 50-person company and that's probably $1 million project. Like, are you willing to do that? But, like, early on I would say, like, yeah, we could do something similar to that. And then it would fall short inevitably because it was like, well, I don't know, I kind of I didn't overestimate, but, like, I thought they understood that it wouldn't be exactly like that, but we would take certain inspiration from certain things. Right. But, like, since then, our process has pretty much completely changed to where it's like now we're often the ones coming up with the ideas in the beginning. It's not so much clients saying like, hey, here's a little map of everything that we need. Here are the design frames. Here's the audio. Like early on, it was like, we just need you to animate this thing. But now it's like,
can you put this together for me?
Right. But now it's, hey, we want to work together and we have a good budget for marketing over the next year.
Yeah.
Like those are my favorite conversations, because it's like, all right, now we can explore like ideas. Like we're not so like narrowed into different things. But
yeah.
Anyway, that's the long answer of.
No, that's great. That's great. No, that's great. I mean, that's what I wanted to like. I wanted to hear, and I think it's important for people to hear and understand, because I think there's myself included early on. It was just you get so happy to like somebody wants to work with me, and so you end up taking work. And there's stuff that I look back at and I think I never should have taken that project ever. Mm-hmm. Right? They're basically like, we just need this. Whenever a client says we just need this, it's just like, oh no.
That's one of those
words.
Like,
oh yeah, we can do that.
Right.
Yeah, just is just. That's a dangerous word. We just need you to do this.
Right. That answers so many of my questions on like even budget. Whenever someone's like, hey, we just need this, I'm like, okay, so what you're trying to tell me is that you don't really have a budget for this project, and you have no budget. you know exactly what you want. You have no budget, and right.
you need me to come in even under that budget, right?
right.
Yeah. So that's and so there's a little bit of coming up with like a process and having clear convictions on who you are and what you're about. And even like, I think a lot of times clients come to you and they'll say, even if we ask ourselves, like, have you ever tried to like convince somebody to do something different? Like if you're buying something else, or even if you have like, you have a coupon and you go up there and the coupon expired and you're like, couldn't you just, there's this like, it couldn't hurt to ask mentality, right?
Right.
And the person, we've had situations where the person said, no, I'm sorry, we can't do it. And I still, all right. And you go back and you buy the thing anyway, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times what's happening is we have clients who are coming to us and they're wanting to see, hey, do you have a process in place? And if you come back and say, hey, we have a process, this is the way we work, and it's effective and it's great. And I think they're kind of like, really? And they're just pushing like, if you cave in a little bit, then we're going to run the show.
Right.
But if you say, no, I have clear convictions, and, and I think a lot of times they're just kind of testing the waters to see, like, are you the person we want to work with, to partner with? And I think it really is I see it really as a partnership, right? We're talking about either creative teams internally, or, if you're working with another team as you're developing, an animation or something, right? They have the expertise in the field, but I think a lot of times they have blinders on what they really need. And they can't do what you can do, right? And so you know how to do this thing, but you don't have the insight into their business that they have. And so there's just, it's a partnership in that way. And so you have to figure out, like, how do we work together, right? And so if you see this as we are a team collectively, whether the team is the copywriters and the graphic designers, or this is the client and we're the people who are like doing the create, like whatever that is, you still have to figure out how do you work together as a team.
Right.
So yeah, establishing that, having clear expectations set up front is like the best thing you could possibly do. And let's say in any type of relationship like that, it's just saying like, here's what we will do, and here's what we're about, and here's what we don't do. And when you set that tone and then like stick to it, it helps manage like how the process moves forward, right? Because it's hard, at the time that something comes up, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, we don't do that. It might be too late because they've already had a conversation internally, like we want this now.
Right.
So setting those expectations up front, and I think be as clear as possible. And I think just like, honestly, just, I won't say like throw it out there, but you do kind of have to throw it out there and say, here's what we do, here's what we don't do, here's how we're going to work together. Yeah. Because if you don't, you leave it up to their imagination, and they'll start, man, they're really good at filling in the blanks.
Right. One more question.
Really good at it.
One more question. I'm going to throw it over to you, Shelby. So for the people, I mean, we've all seen the people before, but there's always those people in those creative meetings that are just the loudest, right? They have good intentions. They're not trying to do that, but since they are the loudest, it just makes everyone else sort of shut down. So what do you say directly to that person?
So what I like up front, one, statistically, if it's a brainstorming, like, hey, let's just try to get some ideas as to where this might go. I do like the idea of giving people the opportunity to work independently first. Say, let's take 10 minutes. Everybody just jot some ideas down. Here are some things. And I even will give some prompts, like, we want big ideas. And even when I say we want big ideas, people don't really know what that looks like. So I'll say, I read in a book once, Big Think. I'm trying to think what it's called. Big Think. I'll come back up with that title in a second. But the guy was like, what might win the respect of, like, what would you do that you could gain millions of followers but bankrupt your company? And he's like, think about that. And it's just like, oh man. And even I say that, people are like, oh, I don't want to go there, you know?
That's interesting.
But that, something like that is like a really, that will come up with a really big idea. And then once you do that, the idea is to take what would bankrupt the company and then, all right, so if that would bankrupt the company, how far can we slide that down so that we didn't do that, or that we were profitable on it, right? So you're making adjustments there. So when you come up with, everybody comes up with their own individual ideas, and then we say, okay, let's read those and just see, like, where are we? Like, what sounds like a good starting place? That's the first thing that I do to try to manage the person who is the one who is the most boisterous, right? They have the strongest opinions. Quite possibly even the one who's just like, this is my idea and this is how we're like, and I know my idea is good. We're going to go with this.
Right.
I think in facilitating these conversations, you have to have somebody who is unafraid to ruffle feathers and be able to tell that person, hey, that's great. Let's give some other people an opportunity to speak up, and then shift gears, right? I found that there's still, no matter what, there still has to be somebody in charge. That doesn't mean that person in charge, like, what they say goes. It's more like somebody who is able to hold this loosely, because when you get creatives together, you may get some people who are really passionate.
Right.
And there has to be somebody who is, I'm agnostic in this. Like, I want to see the project succeed, but I'm agnostic as to whose idea we go with. And I want to make sure that everybody's ideas are heard, or that everybody's voice is heard. And I find that a lot of times the people who are the most quiet have some of some really brilliant ideas, and it bothers me that sometimes those people never get a chance to speak. And so I am adamant about, if I look around, I see that there are people not speaking, I'll be like, Carol, we haven't heard anything from you. You know, what are you thinking? And usually when you give that space and just have everybody else just be quiet, they will say some, like, really profound things. It just takes them a little bit more time to, like, think and process, as opposed to, like, I'm just formulating ideas as they're coming out of my mouth. But you have to have somebody who is in charge, who is able to navigate those relationships well, and to be able to say, my goal is to make sure that the best ideas come out of this discussion, and that means hearing from everybody. Yeah. And a lot of times and I think too, sometimes the person who is in charge isn't the person who should be facilitating the conversation. There could be somebody who is better suited to doing it. And I think it takes a lot of insight or humility, or maybe even training, to say, hey, you know what, at some point I want you to be the person who runs this, because I want to be the person sitting back observing what happens, or even being one of the people who's contributing ideas. Because if you're the one who's running the meeting and you're contributing an idea and you happen to be the owner of the company, people around be like, we need to go with your idea because, you know, you're signing my paycheck.
Right.
You know?
I feel like that's something that I run into every so often, where I'm like, it's hard to just, like, it's easy for me at this point to put the different hats on,
Mm-hmm.
but it's tough for everyone else to know which hat I'm wearing at any given moment.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know. I'll get more into that in a bit. But Shelby, I want to kick it over to you.
Yeah, for sure. I was just kind of thinking about things, from a producer standpoint, especially since that's more the side that I tend to stay on. I really like the way you stated, like, just be agnostic. I think it's really good because, especially as a producer or as a leader, being able, because I mean, if you're speaking with a client and you're speaking to your creatives, you have a team of creatives that you need to advocate for, but then you're also communicating for the client. You're kind of playing a sort of a weird game of telephone. And I think that it's really important as leaders that you're making your creatives feel comfortable and empowered to speak up and ask questions and say their ideas, and still maintaining kind of that third party experience almost, because you're not exactly in it, because you need to be able to communicate with both sides of the aisle. I also think too, like, advocating for your team and communicating with the client, like working with those two sides of the aisle, and letting your creatives feel empowered and letting them know that they can be creative, I think is really important. I was thinking the whole time about this conversation I had. I was working for an agency, and one of our supervisors, we were just working on like kind of a basic commercial. It wasn't anything too complicated, but we were spouting off some kind of bigger ideas just for fun, to get the creative juices flowing and getting ideas out there. And he just kind of looked at the three of us that were sitting there as creatives and just said, "We don't make art." And it was, in my heart just sank just to hear that phrase, "We don't make art." And it's like, you need to be able to, like, as a leader and as a producer, or just, any creative lead, let them know that they're still making art, no matter what it is, no matter how small or how big it is, they're still being creative, and they still need to be in that environment where they can feel creative.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's, we don't make art.
I can't imagine that's what he really meant to say. But
it was a very deep meaning.
Was it?
Yeah.
Because, man, that
what?
Yeah.
I guess who all was in the room? Like, how many people were in the room?
Yeah, it was 4 of us. It was kind of a supervisor and then like 3 creative leads. So it was, it was a really, it's stayed with me though. And especially like as a producer and as a leader, I think it's something that stayed with me of, okay, I never want to have that conversation with a team of creatives, because no matter how big or how small that project is, you're still making art.
Yeah, there's got to be I don't know, I think people have a lot of this, I'm trying to think of a lot of this comes down to people have passions, people have things that they're like, if you let them go to do they're going to do what feels natural to them, right? For some people that is creating, that is making. For some people that is like, tell me what you need and I'll help you work out the details. Or for some people, you know what I mean? It's and if I circle back to the what does it mean to be an improviser? It is, you take what feels right and what feels natural to somebody, and you let them go with that thing. It's kind of like if you take somebody who is like just naturally kind of, it's like trying to take somebody who's just maybe naturally prone to like having like a messy workplace, right? And then trying to tell them, we're going to help you organize and become more neat. And it's just, and everything in there is just like, you were going to waste a bunch of people's time trying to do that, right? But if you just let them do that thing that they're feeling called to do, and so they get life out of it, and you find yourself having to like manage them less. And so, as a producer, you're in the space of you're advocating for the creative, the saying like you're here because you're good at what you do and you have passions, and like and to me there's a high value of, again, going back, I'll say trust again, because you just have to trust that if you hire the right people, you trust that they're going to do the thing that you hire them to do, right? And and if they're not doing that thing, then you just it's a different conversation. But when you say it just doesn't make sense to like hire somebody and then try to teach them and tell them to do something different, right? You may have a different methodology, or hey, here's the way we go about it, or here's our system, whatever. That's something that's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
But
sorry.
yeah, it's just no. That's to me, that's it. It's you're hiring good people and then let them do what you hired them to do. And so if it's to be creative and to create art, let them do that thing.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the clients too. A client's going to do what a client does. They are trying to get the most that they can for the least amount of money, and that's just what they do. And just accept that. But you still have to live in this tension of how do we still create really great work and give it to the client at the value that they're looking for, and like meet their needs, and they have a budget they have to work within. It's really this juggling act of, and I would say that even all of that, including like the budgeting process, is part of the creative process, right? There's not this, once we get the money settled down, now we can start being creative. I think the financial component, the proposal writing, all that stuff is part of the creative process, and it can't be viewed as something separate.
Right. Going back to hiring people and letting them do what they do. One of the things that I guess I've sort of done is, I like to think, it's a relatively specific role that I have people play, but I guess I think of it like, okay, here's 75% of what your job is going to be. That other 25% is kind of up to you. And it's like, let's see where you go with that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not like the whole Google thing of like, oh, you get one day every week to just work on your own projects. Not necessarily that, but it's like, show me what you are passionate about. And I guess my job as a creative leader is to try to work that into projects as best that I can. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. But I think that's a big part of it is, and maybe it goes back to just being agnostic about just at this point, like I'm not like 100% about any ideas. There are certain things that I feel strongly about, and I'll certainly bring those up. But I don't know, to me, it's just amazing whenever you do get to hear from people and be like, oh, that's an amazing idea. We're going to use that. Like I can't think about all these different things, but just based on the background that everyone has, naturally they're going to produce just different ideas. And to me, that's one of the most special things about having a team.
It is. It totally is. And it's like, I can't imagine having a team and having a different expectation,
Right.
That seems, I get that there's some sort of, it's a little bit of a give and take, right? Like you said, like I like the 75%, but there's still a little bit of like, I'm going to give you some space just to like do your thing, or what is it that we don't, it's almost like an assumption that you're saying, I know this much about you, but there's a whole part of you that I don't know, and I want to see what you do with that stuff, right? Like what is that part of you that I don't know? What can you do with that?
Right.
Or what ideas, can you come up with?
And sometimes it's as subtle as just like understanding any one person's inspiration in anything. Like everyone has different Pinterest boards, right? Everyone has different tastes. So it's like, okay, well, for this project, we're going to do this. And just leaving the door open enough to where somebody could be like, hold up, what if we did it like this? And it's like, in my mind, sometimes I'm like, absolutely not. But I'm like, you know what? Try it. Prove me wrong. Like, I don't think it's going to work, but here's your chance.
Go for it.
Go ahead. But like, and sometimes it is just something completely off the wall, like just different kind of skill set idea altogether. And even in those cases, I'm like, all right, go ahead. I don't know, but
and to me, that's the thing. It's like when it takes somebody, like the design by committee thing is just everybody has equal say, but somebody, I really believe that there has to be somebody who is leading the charge, who, carries your values of as your organization or your company, or whatever else, but is not married to any specific
Right.
like outcome.
Yeah.
And so they're the one who is just making sure that the creative process continues to move forward, that people are going to do what they do best if you give them the freedom to do that. You give them some control. You give them just the ability to like control how they come up with what they come up with on their own. There's not some sort of you must do it this way.
Right.
I think people have different ways of going about things and creating. And to me, that's ultimately the win and how I think a team works together. It is letting people do what they do best on their own. I'd say not on their own terms. A lot of times on their own terms, like they still need deadlines.
Right.
But yeah, ultimately having somebody, and I, like you were saying that for you, Matt, you probably have to like switch hats and like, hey, 1 minute I'm interacting with a client, 1 minute I'm running the business, 1 minute I'm being creative. I'm like doing the creative, right? I'm doing the work, right? And so I wonder how for you, how do you let your team know which hat you're wearing and when?
Right. So
yeah, just to.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because for me, after I'm done doing this, we'll do some final thoughts here. I gotta go into an eye doctor appointment soon, but for me, it's about, I made an org chart, right? As corporate-y and boring as they are, it was like, I need to figure this out. I need everyone to understand where I'm supposed to be, and I need them to see where I'm spread too thin. And basically it was like, okay, like I want to be CEO of the company and manage just how the business operates, just how we make money and how we go about being creative with the things we do. That's where I want to focus.
Yeah.
But after making this whole chart, I'm realizing like, ooh, Matt's in a lot of different areas. Like, and so for me, it was like being honest with myself. I'm like, where am I? And just the other day, I was like, all right, talking to the team, like, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to fill these positions over time so that I can focus on this stuff. Because the less I focus on this, just, I don't know, it's not going to lead to growth of really any kind until I can really focus on this. So, yeah, I guess, so for me, it was just being honest with the whole team together of just like, here's what we're trying to do. But there's
where is your greatest contribution to the company, you personally, right?
And that's exactly, and that's where I'm like,
you can do everything because you've been doing everything,
right?
But there's one thing that like only you can do that will make the most impact in the business, right?
Right, and it's impossible to be able to do all these creative things as much as I think it comes to this idea of I am creatively secure. So the opposite of creatively insecure, right? I'm very aware of my creative abilities. I have nothing to prove. I've done everything that I've ever wanted to do creatively. So I'm good. I'm not saying I'm never going to create anything ever again, but I'm also a teacher. So I enjoy seeing people grow in the positions that they have.
Right.
I have almost flipped my business into being Matt does everything, Matt's creative, to Matt's a teacher. I haven't told Shelby or anybody else that concept in my mind, but like to me, that's what it is. All right, I got to go here in a few minutes, so let's do let's do final thoughts.
That's great.
Shelby, final thoughts. Go.
Oh gosh, yeah. I think a lot of this comes down to trust. I think trusting your creatives, trusting to the ideas of clients and being able to work with them. Yeah, I think clarity, trust, transparency is a lot of what this comes down to.
Right. John, final thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with what Shelby said about trust. And then just as the conversation continued on, just this idea of design by committee versus having somebody in charge, and that somebody in charge isn't in charge of all the creative. That person is in charge of managing the creatives, that they are the ones who can empower others to be like their creative best, and that like the creative just that the best ideas rise to the surface, and the project benefits across the board because of it.
Love it. So I'll say, basically being a creative leader of any kind, I think you obviously need to be assertive, and you also need to have empathy. And those are two things that are very uncommon. Those are very contrasting things sometimes. It can be seen that way anyway. But I think that both of them are very, very important to being creative as a team, and honestly, even as an individual, of just being like, hey, you know what? Here's the idea. I'm going to go with it. Or, I don't know, or change your idea once you've already gone down the path. It's okay. You can do that. But on the last episode, we were talking about this, we had a ship analogy of like, you're a captain of a ship, and for me, it's like as a creative leader, you need to set the direction, and you need to get everybody on board and make sure that everybody agrees. I mean, you need to make sure that everyone agrees with you, because that's what's going to make a good team, and you need to go in that direction. Now, there's going to be times where you need to change course, but it's being honest and again, and assertive, like, oh, I was wrong because of this. Here we go. We're going this way now.
Right.
All right. Those are final thoughts. John, thank you so much for joining this. I think we're gonna have to have you on again several times.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate this, dude. I always love all the stuff that you have going on, and I
appreciate it.
Every time I see it, I'm always like, how is he doing all this? It's amazing. I love how you keep track of. Yeah, seriously, man.
It's a village, right?
Yeah, totally. So appreciate this, Shelby. Great meeting you.
Yeah, fantastic to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Love you. Bye.
The Command-Z Show is created by Made by Things. And if you have a question you would like us to discuss, you can send a message at cmdz.show. And if you like what you hear, leave a review. We'll see you next week with a brand new show.